Hey, John, can you or Ron give a little bit of history? And this might be a little personal indulgence, but a little bit of history of the executive secretaries and IFRs, et cetera, that have worked for P.A.D.
Well, there was a guy named Ed Anderson a few years back.
Well, Ron, why don't you start?
He was kind of a washout. So is there anybody else that did anything?
I recall didn't he welcome me to the greater Los Angeles area around 1994, right after an earthquake? Weren't you out there then, Ed?
I actually moved out there in '95, so it might have been Carol that welcomed you.
All right. Now I know. Well, I thought you were out there at one point, but when I was out there, but maybe I'm mistaken about that. Well, I served, as some of you might know, as executive secretary from August of 1981 until April of 1983. And for the first year, I served alongside a woman named Robin Blumfield, later married Robin Middleman. And so we shared an office, and she helped teach me the ropes about traveling around the country. I don't recall, John, if we got a whole lot of training in the gig in terms of what to do. I just remember sitting with your father and going over the places in the country that we needed to visit. Generally, there were the chapters that were struggling. It wasn't too often we went to a chapter that was thriving. And occasionally I'd be sent to law schools where there were no chapters and try to get something rolling. So it was a great gig for a young guy, 26 years old, just out of law school, living in Southern California, traveling around the country at somebody else's expense. I enjoyed it tremendously. Although I took it to heart, and I recognized, since they were paying me the princely sum to be both pre-law director and executive secretary, $15,000 a year. Clearly, I wasn't doing it for the money, and I felt, well, they must not have much. So when I go on the road, I'm not going to spend much. And I kept my expenses down. I slept on couches of friends that I knew out there in the countryside. But it was a great gig. What was crazy about it is, and Ed, you'll remember this, you'd get on an airplane, you would fly someplace, you'd get off the plane, get into a hotel or motel, make some calls, get up the next day, check out, go to a school, spend the whole day there. You'd walk into the campus and probably know no one there, and have to do your best to make them feel comfortable with you and you with them, and discuss what their issues were and try to give them some solutions. And if you're lucky, you got a chance to eat something during the day, and then onto another airplane and onto another city. And it was like that day after day after day for 2 weeks at a time. And literally, I remember waking up in a Holiday Inn somewhere and staring at the ceiling at 6 a.m. saying, "Where the hell am I?" You know, and then you get your bearings and you realize, oh yeah, that's right, I'm in Laramie, Wyoming. So
I was in Tulsa, Ron, when that happened. I had to look at the phone book and see if I was in Tulsa or if I was in Little Rock.
Right.
I couldn't remember.
Right. It happened. And so we would travel for a couple of weeks. And of course, back then, and Ed, I don't know when the advent of things like, cell phones and texting and all that stuff, email, but back in the early 80s, there was no texting, there was no cell phone, there was no email. Our communication was done via letter or phone, and that was, station to station, if you will, from somebody's desktop to somebody's wall phone in the kitchen. And I don't even think there were answering machines back then. So if you didn't catch somebody picking up the phone, you couldn't communicate. So it was back in the dark ages of communication, relatively speaking. But we made it work, and but I would get in after being someplace all day. I would get on a plane, fly someplace else, get to the hotel, unwind. If I was lucky, I got something to eat. And each night, John, you'll remember this, I had this handheld recorder. I'd put a tape in it, and I would record what happened that day so they could prepare a report. And I'd put it in the mail the next morning before I went to my next gig, so that it could work its way back to Granada Hills. So when I got back after 2 weeks on the road, all my reports were there just ready for me to proofread, after Don Moore had read them, of course, and go through them all and sign off and be prepared to report back to the board and to Fred Weitkamp, executive director, and the DJs and whoever else. So it was a nomadic experience, but it was fantastic. I loved it because on the weekends I was living in Southern California and, checking out Malibu and Venice Beach and all that stuff. So it was a great gig. I loved it. But anyway, so I did such a great job that they didn't need Robin Blumfield after my first year. And they said, Ron, you can do it all yourself. So I did it all myself for a year, and they compensated me to the tune of $19,000 for that second year. So I'm forever grateful. I would have done it for, well, should I say, John, I would have done it for nothing? You can't come after me.
Not in this group, you never say that.
Yeah. But I truly loved it. And then after me, I'm trying to think who came on after me. I know that Nora Barron was there for a while. I know that Karen Onifer was there for a bit.
While you're thinking about it, while you're thinking about other names, you had a question about training. And I will tell you that FJW's MO, now that he's passed, was to give you the bare minimum information and then send you out and see how you did your first trip.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have a particularly good trip, he'd spend more time training you. If you did fine, you didn't get any more training.
Okay. Well, I didn't get a lot of training, so I so anyway, so before me was a guy named John Farmer. Before you were giving names to people, Batman and Robin. Joe
74.
Yeah, Jim Freeman and Joe
Rippinger.
Thank you. Yeah, those guys were a duo a few years before me. And then I think Eric Hudson did it for a while. I'm not sure when they changed the name, John, to International Field Rep.
It's been several names. The first person was National Field Representative, and that was Sandy Ray.
1946.
Yeah, he came from, I think it was 49. He came from the East Coast to the West Coast, but he didn't fly. He took the train and visited chapters on his way to the executive office.
On his way to starting the job? He started the job?
Yeah.
Well, he went to Duke Law School, right? So
he did.
Yeah. So
but we captured him and didn't let him go.
Yeah.
And he became Mr. P.A.D. in Southern California.
And my volleyball partner in the sand.
Yeah. And then there were special assistants to the Supreme Justice, and Frank McCown was one of those, and Steve Clark was one of those. They didn't travel out of the office, but they traveled to chapters and did other functions for the Supreme Justice.
McCulley traveled.
The next one was Rick McCulley.
Right.
Rick came out and loved his time there, did a great job for us. And he didn't forget about it. When he went home, he kept reactivating chapters and establishing new chapters, and has continued to do that, pretty much to this day. Let's see.
Adam, mute.
Let's see, who else? Yes, Robin Middle.
Mike Harwin. Mark Harwin from New Jersey.
Mike Harwin came from New York, and my first meeting with Mike was at the curb in front of our law office, which was in the front of the executive office, and that was to watch him getting a ticket from a police officer for his driving. He almost had him talked out of it, not quite. And Mike did very well on the job. In fact, after his 2-year term was up, he stayed for an extra year and did some placement work for the fraternity and other things. He worked for the firm for a couple of years, and then he went to work for an attorney that was had much notoriety, completely different type of attorneys than we were, and worked under him for a while, and then he got appointed to the bench and did criminal work for a number of years. He had a shootout in his office, in his courtroom, and after that, we had lunch, and he was bitching about the fact that he was on all kinds of security committees now, and he said, if I knew anything about security, it wouldn't have happened in the first place. And he met his wife out here, and they have 2 kids, and his son is a P.A.D. And he's still on the bench, still doing quite well. He gets together with Marvin Moss all the time and knocks on the door of PADs across the country when he and his wife are vacationing and that type of thing. Um, so many. Anyway, the name went from National Field Representative to Executive Secretary when Dad's title changed to Executive Director. And then it was International Field Representative, and then it was Membership Services Consultant. And it continues to change. I hope we will have some version of that. Again, I think it was very important to us, and I think we could use it right now, personal belief. There was a sister by the name of Harriet Gingrich, who worked at the same time as a sister by the name of Jamoa Moberly. Harriet was from Don Hudson's area. He was very taken with the job that she had done for her chapter and had recommended her. Jamoa had been in one of the Orange County chapters and had come up, and she traveled for the better part of a year, and then she had a business opportunity open up, so she went away. She is now sitting on the Orange County Superior Bench and doing a very good job. I don't know what Harriet did when she went back. John Farmer stayed out and is in insurance defense work in Thousand Oaks area. We kept a fair amount. We wanted to keep you, but we just couldn't seem to seal the deal.
Yeah.
Robin Middleman is selling real estate in Orange County. I would appreciate it. I'll get you her email address. If you would be so kind as to drop her a line, I'm working on getting her to the next convention.
I'll help you do that.
She'll be one of those that hasn't been for a chunk of time. Karen Onifer came out here from Ohio, worked for the fraternity for 2 years, and then worked on some special projects for about another year. Never practiced in California, sold real estate for a long time, has done loan brokerage work, and she's now in Northern California. And she hadn't been to a convention since 1984, and she popped up when we encouraged her for 2016 and has been to the last 3. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Who was the young lady from Nebraska? Wasn't there somebody from Nebraska? Maybe ran into a little bit of a problem.
We talked about Nora Barron. She came from Oklahoma. She stayed after her term was up. She has practiced law in Southern California for a while. She is now in Dubai with her husband, and she's teaching at one of their colleges right now. That's what I started working on her for 2016 too, but I haven't been able to work the timing out yet for one of our conventions.
Yeah. You're thinking of Jill Leonard, I think it was, right?
Yes.
Jill Leonard, yes. Jill Leonard as well. Jill went home. Jill is in the military and doing fairly well. She was one of the early folks who ended up with COVID. Managed to do quite well getting through it and everything.
There was another young lady who I think went on to be our pre-law director or something, but she traveled first. I remember she got her luggage lost or stolen, or her wallet stolen somewhere. Do you remember who I'm talking about? Anybody?
Trying to put a name.
Remember? I can picture her, but I can't think of her name.
I'll have to pull the list up.
Yeah.
There are at least another dozen.
Hey, Ed Anderson, who was before you and after you?
Carol Duncan was before me.
Carol, that's what I'm thinking.
Arkansas.
Yeah.
Carol
That's
was from the
exactly what I'm
Garland chapter in Arkansas.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm thinking of. Is Carol Duncan.
Garland
Yeah.
chapter would have been Oklahoma.
I'm sorry, not Garland chapter. What's the chapter at Euler?
Oh, you're right. And
where?
Fayetteville is Garland chapter, sorry. I thought
Correct.
I think that's right. And I think Byron Rupp came after me.
Well, Robin, did you say University of Little Rock? Robinson, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's it. Robinson chapter. You're right.
Yeah.
That's where Carol was from. Carol is
That's
now
one thing for those folks listening in with us. That's the one thing you learn in this gig, being the traveling rep. You learn all the names of all the chapters.
Byron became the international field representative in 1996, And he had the misfortune of having a 2-year term, and about 3/4 of the way through that, the executive director resigned unexpectedly, and so he got stuck working with me for 8 months. He helped me get assimilated. It'd been a while. I'd stepped back trying to get out of all this stuff, and he was the IFR at that time, and was not going to be leaving the fraternity. He stayed on and was pre-law director for a couple years. Then he went to Texas for about 1.5 years, came back, and then he went back on staff until just about 2 or 3 years ago. And he became the pre-law director and did a really good job for the fraternity for a good long time. He managed to get Karen and I to go out and put 8 chapters together while he was doing it. So not afraid to tag people.
He's back in Kansas now, right?
He's back in Kansas now. He works for a religious college, and in 2.5 years, he's booked $4.25 million for them. So they're very happy with him. I keep asking him if he'll give us some of that time back and volunteer work for the foundation. Ed, I've got a complete list of all of the officers going all the way back. I'll make a list of all of the traveling folks. And
Oscar Maldonado.
Oscar Maldonado, yeah, and he's back in Texas and is practicing in the south end of Texas, and trying to get him back to a convention as well.
Yeah, he came to DC, and I put him up at my, he stayed at a hotel, but he needed to do laundry, so he came to my apartment to do laundry, and then someone stole his laundry.
Oh, we had a gentleman for 1 year by the name of Larry Geller from New York, and
That was early on,
that was
I think.
probably 5 or 6 years after Rick McCulley.
Yeah.
In that range.
Right. So Ed Anderson, what was your favorite?
Work for us.
Ed, what was your favorite part of the gig?
I think seeing chapters become successful, that if you could go in and tell the students that you've got authority to run this chapter, here's what P.A.D stands for. Don't embarrass yourselves, don't embarrass the fraternity, but be creative and tell people what we're all about and be successful. And then seeing them do it, I got to reactivate one and charter one chapter while I was IFR, and those were probably the high points that I actually got to attend the ceremonies. But just going in and taking a struggling chapter, and you might show up and there's just 4 or 5 people or less. Sometimes you'd have to go in, and I didn't have the authority to do it on paper, but you'd have some officers that weren't willing or able to do the job, and you could get them to step aside and put somebody else in that had the time and energy to do the job, and you could see that chapter become successful a year later. That was probably the best part. But when I did the job, Ron,
Yeah.
I had taken a job at the Orange County District Attorney's Office, which paid $36. Orange County declared bankruptcy, so they rescinded my offer. And P.A.D paid $30, which was the same as a starting highway patrolman, a California highway patrolman. So I thought I was doing at least as good as, Poncherello and John Baker. So I enjoyed it.
The same job without the badge and the gun.
And Ed, the rights and privileges you extended to those officers to do certain things, Brother Tom Bentz refers to that as the magic wand.
Yes. We talked about the magic wand at the executive office, and the executive director would tell me, Eddie, just use your magic wand. The P.A.D police aren't coming. Go ahead and do it.
So Ed, who had the unenviable task of following you in that job?
It was Byron. I think the job was empty. Marie actually fired me, and I think the job was empty for several months, and then Byron took over after I did.
And didn't she travel? Wasn't that her original gig? Wasn't she an IFR or something?
She
John?
was. Yeah, she was.
And then she was the pre-law director for a period of time, and then we had the opening after Dalton's term, and that was open for about a year, and then she came in and stayed until the end of January of '98.
You guys did some traveling. This is Shannon Holland in Knoxville. I have another question, John, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Why did we stop using the designation of Supreme Justice? I always remember, was it Sandy Ray who was the last past Supreme Justice?
No,
Ray Judy.
Ray Judy,
Ray.
1976 convention. The matter was put before the body whether or not to change all the international officer positions from a supreme to international. It went before the Constitution and Bylaws Committee, who debated it for 3.5 hours. The rest of the committee then adjourned to the social event. The chairman of the committee and the clerk remained behind and typed up the 26-page single-spaced report, because the whole Constitution and bylaws were rife with the term supreme, and it was presented and it was adopted. The term supreme came into being in 1908, and the brothers at that time determined they needed to be something more than just president, secretary, and all that good stuff.
Well, thank you. I always wondered.
Other questions?
Come on, Jay, you have to have a question.
Actually, mine are just kind of fill in the blanks questions.
I'll talk about another brother. You all know him, but you don't really know what he did for P.A.D. And that's Brother Tom C. Clark, who served on our Supreme Executive Board from 1964 to 1968 as the International Vice Justice. That was not an honorary title. He took his work for the fraternity very seriously. He traveled on his own dime to chapters and appeared at alumni functions and appeared at conventions. In fact, his last convention was 1976, the one we were just talking about, just before he died. He had very fixed ideas on where the fraternity should go, and they were a lot along the lines of Bob Redding and professionalism. He is the one that put forth the idea of having the Distinguished Service Chapter for recognizing our members for work above and beyond. And it was a real loss when he left the board in 1968. He stayed involved to an extent, but it wasn't that long after that that he had to leave the court, because his son, Ramsey Clark, became the Attorney General. But he really did some fine work for us. If there was a break and he had some time and there were some P.A.Ds in the area, he'd have them come over and he'd take them on his tour of the Supreme Court. For 6 years, his law clerks had to be P.A.Ds, and it was quite a thing to have him as part of our board and to have his participation. He was phenomenal.
So actually, that was one of my questions. I don't know how you.
It's all that time we spent together the last 2 years.
Okay. That was like the first question, because he was vice justice until 68, and then I guess the continuing part of that Question is who ended up being the IJ, 68, 70?
June 6, 1994. Honorary initiation at the United States Supreme Court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg became a member of our fraternity. And unlike some of the other members of the court, she took it seriously. She's been involved. Her principal thing has been to appear at the P.A.D. days at the Supreme Court whenever she could. But she did other things behind the scenes too. In February of 1998, that was back when the P.A.D. PSC P.A.D. Public Service Center still existed. At that time, its vice president, which basically was the organizer, was Mike Harwin from Los Angeles, and he was putting together a teleconference on law-related education, and it was going to be telecast to 200 locations at the same time. It was pretty much ahead of its time at that point. They got a television commentator to host it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg did the foreword to it, and Mike sent her a script. She called back and had a number of changes, and she basically reworked it and was 10 times better. And I mean, this is not something where she put in 5 or 10 minutes. She put a lot of time into this thing, and made herself available to make it come off. And at that time, it was a real feather in the PSC's cap, because nobody else was doing anything like that. And just a phenomenal sister, phenomenal lady. She did some work on some other projects and some other publications back around that time as well. And one of my cherished possessions is a handwritten note from her.
I'd like to mention a story about Bob Redding and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was in the hospital and you know, on a floor where you weren't supposed to get to, and Bob Redding somehow figured out a way to get flowers, and was walking along the hallway and saw the justice, and she said, "Bob, what are you doing here?" And he said he was bringing her flowers, because she was ill, and they had another conversation there. But they always like hearing that story about Bob. So.
You know, Curtis, this is Shannon. You're absolutely right. And every time I saw Justice Ginsburg and Bob Redding, who moved my admission to the Supreme Court, and my father's and Ed Anderson's too in the same year, she would go straight to Bob Redding, and she would grab him by the cheeks and would kiss him every time. And it was so surprising because she was not an emotional, outgoing person like that, but she loved him. And they had such a nice friendship. And I remember when I went to DC one time for the y'all will remember when it was, and I can't recall the exact year, but it was an initiation. Jenny Tang presided, and it was at the Supreme Court. And Sonia Sotomayor came, and she spoke. And I don't know if she said it to me privately or to the whole assemblage, but she said that she joined and Elena Kagan had joined P.A.D. because when they arrived at the court, Justice Ginsburg told them that that's what they needed to do, and they took whatever she said seriously. I always thought that was quite a proclamation for P.A.D.
Yeah, very true. And Bob had a few stories like that. I went with Bob once to see Justice. I'm trying to think. It wasn't Scalia. One of the justices. We just went in to say hello and sit down and talk to him. And that's the type of thing Bob was able to do at the Supreme Court. But when we gave Justice Ginsburg her Tom C. Clark Award, Shelley and I went along with Bob and actually got to meet her in her chambers to present her with the award. That was kind of fun.
That's quite special.
Yep.
So I have a question that I think no one else will care about, but that John may be able to answer for me. And I'm curious to know about how the official membership rolls were maintained before they were computerized, how that transfer happened, and what was done to ensure their accuracy. I know when I first started studying Webster chapter history back when I was in law school, the first thing I did was get a list of all our members from throughout history, dead or alive or missing. And it was, as I recall, printed on one of those old green and white striped pieces of paper with the pinwheel holes at the sides. And I spent a lot of time going up and down that list trying to figure out who people were. And it wasn't always complete. We didn't know all the initiation dates. We didn't know a lot of things, but I was always curious how those lists were, how before we had computers to keep track of all that stuff.
As they came in, each one was stamped, and once we had computers, then it was also entered into the computers, so we had two in case there was a problem, because one of the things we learned early on is Delta Theta Phi was the first of the three major fraternities to computerize all its records, because one of its members worked in an insurance company and they had the facility to do it. And so they converted all the records, they destroyed all the paper records. Somebody pushed the wrong button on the computer, they lost about a third of their members. They never recovered. So we tried to learn from those things. So we had a dual system, and there was a book into which all of the forms went in sequence, so they were always in numerical order, and they just was rows and rows and rows of them. And by the time that Dalton got there, all of the records that we had, and it was not all of them, but it went back into at least the 30s, as I recall, had been inputted into the computer. And the hard copies went with Frank Paddock in 1999 when he and Jolie Headley had a truck and loaded up all the goodies at the office and went back east with them. So they had all of them. If I had to guess, I'd say they are no longer around, but I know that they were until at least 2010 or 2012, because Rhonda gave to the officers as her parting gift was their original membership application. So it still existed back to then, at least.
So how did those people from before the 1930s ended up getting added on the computer? Because I know, for example, that the charter members of Webster chapter Lambda Epsilon from 1901 were on that list I had. It didn't give their initiation dates or much information, but it had them on.
The only other source that I know that it could have been were the membership directories.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if someone actually went through the directories and tried to figure out who was missing from the records.
Well, I know that the directories got used for a lot of other purposes, so that would not surprise me at all. Some of the later directories were actually used by one member whose sole function was to find lost members. She managed to find enough to pay for her salary 3 times over. So, and they used everything. This is before you could get the lists from various agencies now that you can get at the drop of a hat.
Hey, John, it was actually Derek Hill that handed out the original applications, because I've got mine right here.
Okay, 2008 then. Okay.
Well, it was 04 to 06.
06.
I served international secretary for Derek, and yeah, my original P.A.D. handwritten application. And of course, there's a number right here, 082842. That was probably stamped on there when they came in, and each
as soon as they came in,
another number.
Yep, and up in my library, you can see in the back of the thing, that's where mine is.
Yeah.
Along with the flag I got from Curtis.
Yeah, that's fun. And you know, one of the things when I'm trying to figure out who people are and stuff like that from those early members is there's some duplicates that ended up on more than one chapter's list. And I always wonder, well, are those people who were initiated by Lambda Epsilon during their 2 years at their first school and then transferred to another school and their memberships were transferred, or how some of that stuff happened.
But between the three organizations, things were very lax. I'll just put it that way. Folks kind of drifted in and out. There are some people who were in the first one and then the third one, but didn't seem to be in the second one. I can't tell you any better than that, but I know that we didn't have the records from before about 32, 34, as I recall, something like that.
Yeah, and it didn't help that still no one can keep track of what school was what, because the law schools in Illinois back then were such a horrible mess. And I know, like I read official biographies, like in governmental sources about some of these people that, for instance, say they went to University of Chicago Law School. And I know they went to Chicago Law School where Webster chapter was founded, and just no one knows what that is. They hear Chicago Law School and just assume.
Oh, yeah. That's been a problem over the years as schools went out of business or merged, all that good stuff. And then the same thing with districts. Every time we redistrict, everybody thinks it's a great thing. It isn't for the people in the office.
John, how many chapters had the same name as their school?
Yours.
I know Toro did.
Well, Baylor.
Yeah, but if I had to give you an estimate, I'd say probably 15. I mean, I can look it up later, but I have to do it online now. It's not as easy as my old record.
I know the very first chapter was Kent chapter at Kent College of Law.
Yeah. One of those changes.
Yep.
I know when we formed Toro chapter, it was between Toro and Silberg chapter. And at the last minute, we got that final approval because there were certificates that came in with the other name on it. And I was directed to put them aside, which is what I did. I'm sorry I didn't keep any of them.
Well, things like that happen from time to time.